The silence of the Upper East Side penthouse was the first thing that hit James Braden. Not the peaceful quiet he sometimes craved, but a dead, sterile vacuum. Elsie was gone. Her shoes were gone. Her coat was gone. But everything else was pristine, as if staged for a magazine shoot. His gaze fell to the center of their king-sized bed. Lying on the perfectly smooth duvet was a single, leather-bound journal. A chill, entirely separate from the autumn air outside, snaked up his spine. He picked it up, his thumb tracing her initials, EMB. His first thought wasn't fear. It was irritation. More drama. James Braden, a man who built an empire on calculated risks and gut feelings, felt neither in that moment. Only a profound and infuriating emptiness. He strode through the sprawling apartment, the floor-to-ceiling windows displaying a panoramic, indifferent New York City skyline. Every room was a testament to his success and her taste, a sterile fusion of minimalist design and Elsie's desperate attempts to inject warmth with fresh flowers and scented candles. Today, the flowers were gone. The air smelled of nothing. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over her contact. Elsie. He pressed it. It went straight to voicemail, the same cheerful, slightly breathless message she'd recorded months ago. Hi, you've reached Elsie. Leave a message, and I'll get right back to you. Have a beautiful day. Elsie, stop this nonsense, he said into the phone, his voice clipped and cold. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Call me. He hung up, tossing the phone onto a marble countertop with a sharp clatter. Pregnant. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a daughter. And she chose now to pull a stunt like this? For weeks, she had been fragile. That was the word his mind settled on. Crying over nothing, claiming she heard noises at night, convinced someone was moving her things. He'd suggested therapy, a vacation, more rest. He'd done everything a good husband was supposed to do. He'd even hired a private nurse to check in on her, though Elsie had resisted, saying it made her feel like a prisoner. His phone buzzed. It was Isabella Vance, his head of acquisitions, and for the past 6 months, the woman who offered him a sanctuary from the escalating emotional chaos at home. Everything all right, James? Her voice was like smooth, aged whiskey, calm, potent, and predictable. Elsie's gone, he said, rubbing his temples. She packed a bag and just left. A perfectly timed pause. Oh, James, I'm so sorry. After how worried you've been about her mental state. Do you think she's a danger to herself? To the baby? The question landed with surgical precision, validating every dismissive thought he'd had. I don't know. I think she's being theatrical. She left her journal on the bed. It's practically a cliché. Maybe you should read it, Isabella suggested gently. It might tell you where she went, or at least what's going through her mind. Be careful, though. A mind in that state can be unreliable. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. He disconnected and stared at the journal in his hand. Elsie's mind. It felt like a foreign country he had no desire to visit. With a sigh of weary obligation, he poured himself a scotch, sank into a leather armchair that cost more than most cars, and opened the first page. The entry was dated 3 months ago. Her familiar, elegant script filled the page. July 14th. James thinks I'm losing my mind. I can see it in his eyes. That little flicker of pity, quickly masked by impatience. It started with small things. My keys not being where I left them. The thermostat turned down so low the apartment feels like a morgue. He says it's pregnancy brain, a condescending, catch-all excuse for his refusal to listen. But it's more than that. I feel like a ghost in my own home. I walk into a room and the scent of a perfume I don't wear lingers in the air. A faint, cloying gardenia scent. When I mentioned it, he just laughed. "Elsie, this place is bigger than our first 3 apartments combined. It's probably just the air vents." "But I know what I smell," James snorted, taking a gulp of scotch. "Gardenias. Of course, it was probably a new cleaner the maid was using." He flipped a few pages, the entries blurring into a litany of perceived slights and imagined anxieties. "July 28th. I'm not crazy. I swear I'm not. I had a prenatal appointment with Dr. Miller today. James was supposed to come, but a last-minute merger crisis came up. It always does. Dr. Miller said my blood pressure was a little high. He told me to avoid stress. I wanted to laugh in his face. Stress is the air I breathe in this glass cage. Afterward, I came home, and the spare key, the one we keep in the ceramic pot on the patio, was on the kitchen counter. I never touched that key. James swears he didn't move it. I feel like someone is playing with me. A cruel little game to see how long it takes for me to break. He slammed the journal shut. This was pointless. It was a road map of a crumbling mind, a detailed account of her descent into paranoia. He felt a surge of anger, not at the person who might be tormenting her, but at Elsie herself, for being so weak, for letting these fantasies consume her. He was building an empire, and she was wilting under the pressure of having everything. Then his phone rang again. The caller ID read Sarah, Elsie's older sister. He braced himself and answered. "James, where is she?" Sarah's voice was stripped of all pleasantries. If I knew that, I wouldn't be answering the phone, would I? "Don't you dare use that tone with me," she snapped. "She called me yesterday. She was terrified. She said you were dismissing everything she said, that you were making her feel crazy. Did you even listen to her? Did you once, for a single second, stop thinking about yourself and consider that my pregnant sister might actually be in trouble?" "Oh, please," James retorted, his patience gone. "She was talking about misplaced keys and phantom perfume, Sarah. She needed help, and I tried to get it for her. This is what she does instead. She runs, because it's easier than facing reality. The only reality she was facing was a husband who stopped seeing her as a person and started seeing her as a liability," Sarah shot back. "You find her, James, or I swear to God, you'll have more to worry about than a PR scandal." The line went dead. James stood in the echoing silence, the weight of Sarah's words and the leather-bound journal pressing in on him. He didn't believe a word of it. Elsie was the one who had left. She was the one who was unstable. He was the victim here, the long-suffering husband. And this journal, he decided, would be his proof. For the next 2 days, James operated on a fuel of caffeine and indignation. He hired a private investigator, a discreet man named Peterson, more to cover his bases than out of genuine concern. He gave him Elsie's photo, her credit card numbers, and a brief, sanitized version of the situation. His pregnant, emotionally distressed wife had left and needed to be found for her own safety. He spent his days at Braden Capital, a monolith of steel and glass in Midtown, immersing himself in the familiar comfort of numbers and strategy. Here, he was in control. Here, emotions were a weakness to be exploited in others. Never indulged in himself. Isabella was a ghost at his side, a silent partner in his narrative. She'd bring him coffee, touch his shoulder with a gesture of perfectly calibrated sympathy, and murmur things like, "Any news? I'm so worried." Or, "You're handling this with so much strength, James." At night, the penthouse felt cavernous. He'd pour a drink and, against his better judgment, open the journal. It was like picking at a scab. Each entry was a fresh wave of what he saw as delusion, each one hardening his conviction that he was on the right side of this. August 12th. I think I'm being followed. It sounds insane, I know. But it's the same car, a dark grey sedan. I see it when I go to the market, when I walk in the park. It's always just, there, I told James. He pulled up the building's security footage on his phone and scrolled through it with a bored expression. Elsie, there are 1,000 grey sedans in Manhattan. You're noticing them because you're looking for them. It's called confirmation bias. He said it like he was teaching a child. I felt my face get hot with shame. Maybe he's right. Maybe I am just making it all up. James remembered that conversation. He'd felt a flash of pity for her then, this woman whose world had shrunk to the point where a common car felt like a predator. He'd tried to be gentle, but his patience had worn thin. He flipped further into the journal, the entries growing more frantic. August 25th. My prenatal vitamins were different today. The pills were a slightly different shade, a bit chalkier. I know it sounds like nothing. I have a whole new bottle, so I took one from there instead. I threw the other ones away. But I can't shake the feeling. It's like the ground is constantly shifting beneath my feet. I have no one to tell. If I tell James, he'll just add it to his list of Elsie's episodes. If I tell Sarah, she'll insist on coming here, and that will just start a war with James. I am so utterly alone. A knot of something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. Annoyance? Guilt? He couldn't be sure. He remembered her mentioning the vitamins. He'd told her she was being ridiculous, that variations between batches were normal. He'd even called the pharmacy to prove it, and they'd confirmed it was possible. He'd felt so vindicated, so rational. Seeing it written in her hand, feeling the desperation seeping through the ink, was different. It was unsettling. His reading was interrupted by a call from Peterson, the PI. "Mr. Braden, I have an update." "Find her?" "Not yet. But her credit card was just used an hour ago. A gas station off Route 17, heading north into the Catskills. And there was a charge yesterday at a small pharmacy in Liberty, New York, for prenatal vitamins and a burner phone. A burner phone. The words landed like stones. This wasn't an impulsive flight. This was planned. She was actively trying not to be found. "She's hiding from me," James said, the realization dawning on him. "It appears that way, sir," Peterson said, his voice neutral. "What's interesting is the other activity on her accounts, or lack thereof. She hasn't touched the joint checking account or her personal savings. The card she's using is a low-limit emergency card you set up for her years ago. She's running on fumes." This didn't fit the narrative. If she was having a breakdown, wouldn't she be spending erratically? Maxing out cards on lavish hotel rooms or spa treatments? This was calculated. Frugal. This was survival. After the call, James walked to the medicine cabinet in their vast, marble-clad bathroom. He saw the new bottle of prenatal vitamins Elsie had bought, sitting next to his shaving cream. On a whim, he opened the trash can beneath the sink. Buried under some tissues, he found the old bottle she'd thrown out. He twisted the cap off. There were a few pills left. He shook one into his palm. It looked identical to the ones in the new bottle. He felt a wave of relief, a justification. See? She was imagining things. He was about to throw it back when he noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible score mark around the gelatin capsule, as if it had been professionally opened and resealed. He held it up to the light. It was nothing. A manufacturing defect. It had to be. He closed his fist around the tiny pill, the smooth coating suddenly feeling sinister. He went back to the journal, a new, urgent curiosity gnawing at him. He read through entries detailing her growing lethargy, her brain fog, her sudden dizzy spells. All things he and her doctor had attributed to a difficult pregnancy. September 10th. I almost fainted today. getting out of the shower. My heart was pounding, and the room was spinning. James was already at work. I called Isabella to ask her to cancel a floral arrangement I'd ordered for a dinner party, and her voice was so strange, so solicitous. "Elsie, you poor thing. You must be terrified. James is so worried. He thinks the stress is getting to you. Please, just rest. Let me handle everything." It felt less like concern and more like a command, like she was enjoying this, like she was waiting for me to fall apart. James's blood ran cold. He had told Isabella about Elsie's dizzy spells, confiding in her during a late-night rendezvous at her apartment. He had painted a picture of his wife as a fragile, crumbling woman. Isabella had listened, her eyes full of sympathy, holding his hand and telling him he was a saint for dealing with it all. He read Elsie's entry again, like she was waiting for me to fall apart. He'd laughed at Elsie's suspicions about Isabella. He'd called it jealousy, insecurity. He'd assured her that Isabella was just a colleague, a friend. A lie. A clean, simple lie he told himself was necessary to keep the peace. But reading Elsie's words, he saw the lie for what it was. A betrayal that had left his wife utterly isolated, with no one to trust, not even her own instincts. The journal was no longer just proof of Elsie's instability. It was becoming an indictment of his own. The next morning, James took the vitamin capsule to a private lab, using a discreet contact from one of his pharmaceutical ventures. He told them it was a competitor's product he wanted analyzed. The lie came easily. A well-oiled mechanism. As he handed over the sample, he felt a tremor in his hand he couldn't control. He spent the day in a fugue state, the normally crisp lines of spreadsheets blurring before his eyes. Every interaction felt muffled, distant. He saw Isabella in a board meeting, presenting Q3 projections with her usual unflappable confidence. He watched her, really watched her, for the first time in months. He saw the way she commanded the room, the subtle deference the other executives paid her. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly composed. Was it possible that beneath that polished exterior was the monster Elsie described? The thought seemed preposterous. Elsie was emotional, intuitive. Isabella was logical, analytical. He had always seen them as polar opposites, and he had craved Isabella's stability. But what if Elsie's intuition wasn't a symptom of her condition, but a survival instinct? That evening he met Isabella for dinner at a quiet, obscenely expensive restaurant in the West Village. He needed to see her reaction, to test the waters. "You seem distracted," she said, placing her hand over his on the table. Her skin was cool, her nails perfectly manicured. "Just thinking about Elsie," he said, pulling his hand away to pick up his wine glass. "The PI tracked her to the Catskills. She's hiding. It's more deliberate than I thought." Isabella's face softened into a mask of concern. "Oh, James, that must be so difficult, to feel like you're the enemy." She wrote in her journal that she thought she was being followed, that someone was tampering with her things, even her vitamins. He watched her face intently. Not a flicker, not a single tell. "Poor thing," she murmured, shaking her head sadly. "The mind is a powerful thing. It can create whole realities to protect itself from a truth it can't handle. Maybe the pregnancy, the pressure of your life, it was all just too much for her." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Honestly, James, this might be for the best, for the baby. If she's this paranoid, she could be a danger. Once you find her, we need to get her into proper care." Immediately. Every word she spoke was a perfect echo of his own thoughts from a few days ago. He had fed her the narrative of the crazy wife, and now she was feeding it back to him, seasoned with her own brand of venomous pity. It was a flawless performance, and it made his skin crawl. He changed the subject, talking about work, about a new acquisition deal. He let her believe everything was normal. But as he looked at her across the table, all he could see was Elsie's handwriting, the desperate loops and slants of a woman screaming into a void. He went home and picked up the journal again, flipping to the later entries. They were shorter, the handwriting more jagged. September 20th. I know I'm not imagining the gardenia scent. It was on the lapel of James's suit jacket tonight. I hugged him when he came home, and it was there, faint but unmistakable. I asked him about it, and he said he had a meeting with a new female client. He got so defensive. His whole body went rigid. He is lying. It's not just a feeling anymore. It's a fact. And the fact is terrifying. James flinched, the memory hitting him with physical force. He'd been with Isabella that afternoon. She wore a gardenia-scented perfume. It was her signature. He remembered the conversation, his own sharp, guilty denial. He had made Elsie feel worthless for noticing the truth. He kept reading, his heart pounding against his ribs. September 28th. Something happened today that finally made everything clear. I went to that little French cafe on Lexington, the one I love, for a pastry. I was sitting in a corner booth when Isabella walked in. She didn't see me. She was with a man I've never seen before. He was slick, nervous-looking. They sat a few tables away. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard a few words clearly. He mentioned a name, Dr. Alistair Finch, and she said something that made no sense. She said, "The Prentice Holdings transfer will be complete once the asset is neutralized." Then she handed him a thick envelope. James's blood turned to ice. Prentice Holdings. Prentice Holdings was a shell corporation he'd set up years ago. It was a ghost entity, used for his most sensitive off-the-books transactions. Only 3 people in the world knew it even existed. Him, his personal lawyer, and his chief financial officer. Isabella Vance was not one of them. The journal entry continued. I don't know what it means. Prentice Holdings. Asset neutralized. It sounds like something from a spy movie. But it was the look on her face. It was cold, predatory. This isn't just about an affair. It's something else. Something dangerous. I can't stay here. I can't protect my baby here. He won't believe me. He'll believe her. I have to go. I'll leave this journal. It's the only proof I have. Maybe one day he'll read it. Maybe one day he'll see. He dropped the journal as if it had burned him. Prentice Holdings. Asset neutralized. The words replayed in his mind, a death knell to his denial. This wasn't about paranoia. This wasn't about hormones or a fragile mental state. This was a conspiracy, and his wife, the woman he had called crazy, had been the only one sane enough to see it. The weight of his failure, his willful blindness, crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He had not just ignored her. He had actively participated in her torment. He had been the primary tool of his mistress's gaslighting. The thought was so vile, so monstrous, he felt a wave of nausea roll through him. He staggered to the bathroom and retched, his body expelling the scotch and the lies he had so easily swallowed. When he was done, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was a stranger's, a fool, a monster, a man who had betrayed everything that mattered. Elsie wasn't the one who was crazy. He was. The lab results came back the next morning. James read the email on his phone, standing in the middle of his silent living room as the sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his old reality. The capsule Elsie had suspected contained not only her prenatal vitamin, but also a significant dose of a benzodiazepine derivative, crushed and mixed with the powdered contents, a drug known to cause drowsiness, confusion, memory loss, and dizziness. In sustained doses, it could mimic the symptoms of severe anxiety and paranoia. It was also known to be dangerous during pregnancy. The email ended with a clinical, chilling sentence. Prolonged, unmonitored use could pose a significant risk to both maternal and fetal health. He had been poisoning his own child, unknowingly, but his ignorance was no excuse. He had been a willing accomplice. His dismissals, his accusations of her being dramatic, had provided the perfect cover for Isabella's methodical campaign. The rage that followed was cold and diamond-hard. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger he was used to. This was a calculating fury. He now had two missions: find Elsie and make Isabella pay. He started with the name from the journal, Dr. Alistair Finch. He called his head of security, Frank, a former NYPD detective with a face like a road map of bad neighborhoods and an unshakable loyalty that James had purchased long ago. Frank, I need you to find someone for me. Dr. Alistair Finch. And I need everything you can get on him. Yesterday. On it, boss. Next, Prentice Holdings. He drove to his personal lawyer's office, a dusty, book-lined suite in a pre-war building that felt a world away from the chrome and glass sleekness of Braden Capital. David, I need to see the transaction logs for Prentice Holdings. For the last 6 months, David, a man in his late 60s with weary eyes, looked at him over his spectacles. James, that's your black box. You've always said you wanted absolute deniability. My circumstances have changed, James said, his voice flat. I need to see what's been moving in and out of it. It took an hour of agonizing waiting while David's paralegal pulled the encrypted files. When the logs were finally printed and spread across the mahogany desk, the truth was stark and undeniable. Over the past 4 months, a series of structured 7-figure payments had been flowing out of Prentice Holdings to another shell corporation, this one based in the Cayman Islands, a company James had never heard of, Vance Markham Equity. Vance, Isabella's last name. Who the hell is Markham? James asked, his voice a low growl. David did some digging. The name came back in 10 minutes. Arthur Markham, a disgraced competitor, a hedge fund manager James had driven into bankruptcy 5 years ago, a man who held a notorious grudge against him. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a jealous woman trying to get rid of a wife. This was a corporate takeover, a hostile one executed from the inside. Isabella was using his own Black Ops fund to pay his enemy. They were systematically bleeding him dry, and the asset neutralization, Elsie, was likely a crucial part of the plan. If Elsie were to be declared mentally incompetent, or if something were to happen to her and the baby, his legal heir, James would be emotionally compromised, distracted. The perfect time for a boardroom coup, backed by Markham's proxy votes and Isabella's insider knowledge. Frank called while James was still staring at the papers, his world collapsing in on itself. Got your doctor, boss, Frank said. Alistair Finch. Used to be a respected pharmacist. Lost his license 2 years ago for selling controlled substances without a prescription. He's been scraping by, doing some shady work for a private clinic. But here's the kicker. His sister was Arthur Markham's executive assistant for 10 years. The web was complete. Isabella didn't just find a random disgraced doctor. She used a connection through her partner in crime. It was all connected. It was all a meticulous, cold-blooded plan. James felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the wreckage of his life. For weeks, he had been living in a fog of arrogance and denial. Elsie had been the one living in reality, a terrifying, predatory reality he had refused to see. He stood up, his mind clear for the first time in months. "Frank," he said into the phone, I want you to pull all the security footage from the garage level of my building for the last 3 months. I also want access to every frame of footage from the lobby of Braden Capital. I want to see every time Isabella Vance met with someone who wasn't an employee. What are we looking for? Betrayal, James said, and hung up. He went back to the penthouse, the journal in his briefcase. He didn't see the expensive art or the panoramic views. He saw the space where Elsie should be. He saw the medicine cabinet where the poison had been stored. He saw the bed where she slept, terrified, next to the man who was supposed to protect her. The guilt was a physical presence, a weight in his chest that made it hard to breathe. But beneath the guilt, the fury was building. Isabella and Markham hadn't just targeted his company. They had targeted his family. They had turned his home into a psychological torture chamber for his pregnant wife. They thought he was a fool. They thought he was blinded by arrogance and lust. They weren't entirely wrong. But they had made one critical, fatal miscalculation. They had underestimated the primal fury of a man who finally realizes he has everything to lose. And they had no idea how ruthless he could be when he had been crossed. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition. James Braden, the corporate raider, turned his predatory instincts inward, dissecting his own life and company with the dispassionate precision he normally reserved for a hostile takeover. Frank worked around the clock, feeding him a steady stream of information that painted a sickeningly clear picture. The security footage was the first piece. Frank isolated every instance of Isabella in the Braden Capital lobby. There, on a Tuesday 6 weeks ago, was footage of her in a hushed, intense conversation with Arthur Markham himself. They thought they were invisible in the river of people flowing through the atrium. But Frank's software isolated them, even reading their lips for key phrases. Board seats. Proxy fight. Braden's heir. Then came the garage footage from his own building. Twice, in the dead of night on weekends, James had been away on business. Alistair Finch's car was seen entering the residence garage using a temporary access code. He would stay for less than 10 minutes each time. 10 minutes was more than enough time to access the apartment using a key Isabella would have provided, swap the vitamins, and leave. James sat in his home office, the evidence laid out on his desk like a battle plan. Financial transfers, photographs, timelines, the lab report. It was an airtight case, not just of corporate espionage, but of conspiracy to commit assault, at the very least. He could go to the police. He would go to the police. But not yet. First, he needed a confession. He needed to look Isabella in the eye and watch her carefully constructed world crumble. It wasn't just about justice. It was about vengeance. It was about clawing back a fraction of the power she had taken from him, the power she had used to terrorize Elsie. He arranged the meeting at the penthouse. He told her it was urgent, that he had news about Elsie. He set the scene with painstaking care. He dimmed the lights, poured 2 glasses of her favorite Chardonnay, and placed them on the coffee table. Between them, he laid Elsie's journal. Closed. When she arrived, she was the picture of concerned sympathy. She wore a cream-colored sheath dress, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She walked in and placed a comforting hand on his arm. "James, you look terrible. Did you find her? Is she okay?" "Sit down, Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. She sat, her posture perfect, her expression a carefully crafted blend of worry and patience. She was playing her part to the end. "We need to talk," he began, sitting opposite her. "Of course, I'm here for you." "I've been reading Elsie's journal," he said, tapping the leather cover. "It's illuminating. She wrote about you." A flicker of something, was it triumph, crossed her face before being replaced by sadness. "I can imagine. I'm sure she saw me as a threat. It's understandable given her state. Her state, James repeated, the words tasting like ash. Yes, let's talk about her state. The dizziness, the confusion, the paranoia. I had her vitamins tested. He let the sentence hang in the air. For the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. Her back stiffened almost imperceptibly. You what? Why on earth would you do that? Because my wife, the woman I called crazy, was lucid enough to notice a difference. They were laced with a benzodiazepine, Isabella. A potent one. Enough to cause all of her symptoms. Enough to endanger the baby. He watched as the color drained from her face. The police are going to have a lot of questions about that. She recovered quickly, her eyes flashing with indignation. That's a monstrous accusation. You think I had something to do with that? James, she was falling apart. She probably did it to herself for attention. It was a brilliant, vicious pivot. But James was ready. Did she also arrange for Dr. Alistair Finch to make 2 late-night visits to this building to swap out the pills? A pharmacist who lost his license and happens to be the brother of Arthur Markham's former assistant? Isabella's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The name Markham was a direct hit. And did she, in her unstable state, also manage to hack into my most secure private accounts? He continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Did she funnel millions of dollars from Prentice Holdings to a shell company called Vance Markham Equity? He stood up and began to pace, the caged energy of a predator finally unleashed. You see, I thought this was a simple, sordid affair. I thought you were just a mistress who wanted to be a wife. But I underestimated you. This was never about me. It was about my company. It was about revenge for your partner, Markham. Isabella stared at him, her mask of sympathy shattered, revealing the cold, hard ambition beneath. Her eyes narrowed. You were an easy mark, James, she hissed, all pretense gone. So blinded by your own ego, you couldn't see what was right in front of you. You wanted a smart, stable woman who wasn't a mess of emotions? Fine. Here I am. You wanted to believe your wife was crazy? I just gave you the evidence you were already looking for. The casual cruelty of her confession stole his breath. She wasn't just admitting to the plan. She was mocking him for his role in it. You fed me the lines, he said, the realization hitting him. All that talk about her being a danger to the baby. And you ate it up, she sneered. You were so desperate to be right, to be the victim in your own little drama. It was pathetic. Elsie was collateral damage, a means to an end. Once she was out of the picture, either committed or gone. And you were grieving, distracted. The board would have been easy to sway. Markham's shares combined with the ones I've been acquiring through our shell. We would have had a controlling interest within 6 months. She stood up, her composure returning. But this time it was different. It was the arrogance of a player who thought she still held a winning hand. But you have no proof of my involvement with the drugs. It's the word of a disgraced pharmacist against mine. And as for the money, good luck proving I was behind those transfers. It will be your word against mine. Who are they going to believe? The brilliant executive or the cheating husband trying to cover his tracks and frame his mistress? James simply smiled, a cold, grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're right, it would be a messy fight. He gestured to a discreetly placed orchid on a side table. Which is why this entire conversation, starting from the moment you walked in that door, has been recorded. Audio and video. He watched the last vestiges of her arrogance evaporate, replaced by a raw, primal panic. Her eyes darted around the room, finally landing on the tiny, nearly invisible lens nestled in the petals of the flower. Her face, for the first time since he'd known her, was a portrait of pure, unadulterated ruin. With Isabella's confession secured, the world shifted into fast forward. James handed the recording and the mountain of evidence to Frank, who delivered it personally to a trusted contact in the district attorney's office. Warrants were issued. By dawn, Isabella Vance and Arthur Markham were in custody. The news of the corporate espionage and conspiracy broke like a thunderclap across the financial world. Braden Capital was in chaos, but James felt none of it. The corporate battle was just noise. The only thing that mattered was finding Elsie. He had the PI's last known location for her, a gas station in the Catskills. But that was days ago. She could be anywhere. He sat in the silent penthouse, the journal open in his lap, feeling a despair so profound it was a physical ache. He had torn down the conspiracy, but he was no closer to fixing the damage he had caused. He had failed her so completely, the chasm between them felt unbridgeable. He forced himself to read the journal again, from the beginning, but this time not as a prosecutor looking for clues, but as a husband trying to find his wife. He searched for the person he had lost, the woman he had stopped seeing. He read about her love for the city's hidden gardens, her fear of thunderstorms, her quiet joy in feeling their baby kick for the first time. He was deep into the early pages, reading an entry about her childhood when he saw it. A passage he'd skimmed over before, dismissing it as irrelevant nostalgia. April 5th, I was talking to Sarah today about Grandma Rose. I miss her so much. I miss those summers she'd take us upstate to her little cabin on Heron Lake. It was our sanctuary. No noise, no expectations. Just the sound of the loons on the water and the smell of pine needles after the rain. She always said, "When the world gets too loud, Elsie girl, you come back to the lake. The water remembers. It will hold you safe." I wish I could go there now. I wish I could just disappear into that quiet and feel safe again. Heron Lake. The words jumped off the page. He'd never heard of it. In all their years together, she had never mentioned it. It was a part of her he had never bothered to know. He scrambled for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Heron Lake, New York. It was a small, private lake in the heart of the Adirondacks, about a 2-hour drive north from where her credit card was last used. A quick property search under her grandmother's name, Rose Miller, brought up a hit. A small, 2-acre plot with a cabin, deeded to Elsie and Sarah upon her death. He was moving before he even had a conscious thought, grabbing his keys, throwing a bag together. He left a single, brief message for Frank. "I think I know where she is. Handle everything here." The drive north was a torment of hope and fear. What would he say? How could he possibly begin to apologize for a betrayal so deep? "I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I thought you were crazy. I'm sorry I let a monster poison you and our child." The words were hollow, inadequate. After hours of driving, he turned off the main highway onto a series of winding, unpaved roads. The GPS signal died. He was guided only by a hand-drawn map from the county website. Finally, he saw it. A small, weathered sign that read, Heron Lake. He followed a narrow dirt track that ended at a small, rustic cabin nestled amongst towering pine trees. A thin plume of smoke rose from its stone chimney. A beat-up old Subaru, which he recognized as her sister's, was parked beside it. He got out of the car, his heart hammering against his ribs. The air was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. It was so quiet. He walked to the door and hesitated, his hand hovering over the wood. This was it. The moment of reckoning. He knocked softly. The door opened, and it was Sarah who stood there, her face a storm of conflicting emotions, anger, relief, and a fierce, protective loyalty. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, blocking the doorway. "I know everything, Sarah," he said, his own voice hoarse. "I know what Isabella did. All of it. I need to see her, please." Sarah studied his face, searching for the arrogant, dismissive man she despised. She must have seen something else there, the raw, undisguised desperation of a broken man, because after a long moment, she stepped aside, and there she was. Elsie was sitting in a worn armchair by a crackling fire, a thick quilt draped over her legs. She was thinner, paler, but her eyes, when they met his, were clear and steady. She wasn't the fragile, crumbling woman from his memory. She looked strong, grounded. The baby bump was prominent beneath her sweater. The sight of her, safe and whole, broke something inside him. He took a hesitant step into the room, and the words came out in a ragged whisper. "Elsie." She didn't speak. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. I read the journal," he began, his voice cracking. "I know. About the vitamins, about Prentice Holdings, about everything. Isabella and Markham. They've been arrested. It's over." He expected tears, maybe anger. He got neither. "It's not over," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They may be gone, but the damage is done, James. Do you have any idea what it feels like to have the one person who is supposed to be your partner, your protector, look at you every day like you're a liability he can't wait to get rid of?" Each word was a perfectly aimed blow. "I was so alone," she continued, a single tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "Screaming, and there was no sound. I started to believe you. I started to think I really was losing my mind. That's the most evil part of what she did. And you helped her." "I know," he choked out, the admission tearing him apart. "I know, and I will never, ever forgive myself for it. I was a fool, Elsie, a proud, arrogant fool. I stopped listening to you. I stopped seeing you. I failed you. I failed our daughter." He sank to his knees, not in a dramatic gesture, but because his legs could no longer support the weight of his guilt. He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just came to tell you that you were right. You were right about everything. You were sane, and you were strong, and I was the one who was blind." He reached into his coat and pulled out the lab report, the confession transcript, the financial statements. He laid them on the floor between them. "This is the proof," he said softly. "Not for me. For you. So you know, for the rest of your life, that you were never crazy." Elsie looked from the papers on the floor to the shattered man kneeling before her. Sarah stood silently in the corner, watching, letting her sister have this moment. The fire crackled, filling the silence. For the first time in a long time, the world was quiet. And in that quiet, a new, uncertain chapter was about to begin. The days that followed at the lakeside cabin were a slow, painful lesson in the art of rebuilding from ruins. There was no grand, cinematic moment of forgiveness. Instead, redemption was built in small, quiet increments. James didn't push. He didn't demand. He slept on the lumpy sofa in the main room, waking at dawn to the sound of the loons on the lake. He chopped wood, fixed a leaky faucet, and made coffee, leaving a mug outside Elsie's bedroom door each morning. He was a guest in her sanctuary, and he acted like it. Sarah remained a wary, watchful presence, her arms perpetually crossed, her gaze sharp. She was Elsie's gatekeeper, and James knew he had to earn his way past her. Most of his conversations were with Sarah at first, while Elsie rested. "She's seeing a doctor in town," Sarah told him one afternoon, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunlight dapple on the water. "He says she and the baby are healthy, thank God. but she's anemic, and her stress levels were through the roof. He said a few more weeks of that. He didn't want to finish the sentence. James flinched, the words a physical blow. I know. No, you don't, Sarah said, her voice cutting. You can't. You weren't the one lying awake at night, questioning your own sanity, feeling your body betray you, while the person sleeping next to you sighed with impatience. You have no idea what she went through. You're right, James said quietly. I don't. But I want to understand. I want to spend the rest of my life trying to understand. Slowly, Elsie began to emerge. She would join him on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and they would sit in silence. The silence was no longer empty and sterile like the penthouse. It was a living thing, filled with unspoken pain, but also a fragile possibility. One evening she finally spoke about it. The worst part, she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon, was the loneliness. Knowing something was deeply wrong, but being told by the person I trusted most that the wrongness was inside me. I took your greatest fear and made it your reality, James admitted, his voice thick with shame. I let my pride and my affair blind me to everything. I wasn't just being a bad husband, I was being a cruel one. There's no excuse. No, she agreed, her voice soft but unyielding. There isn't. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't try to explain away his behavior. He simply owned it. He answered every question she had, no matter how painful. He told her about when the affair with Isabella began, about the lies he'd told, about the things he'd said about her, in moments of confidence with her tormentor. He laid his betrayal bare, offering no defense. It was this brutal honesty, this complete stripping away of his own ego, that began to slowly, painstakingly, rebuild a single thread of trust. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that empty penthouse weeks ago. The crisis had burned away his arrogance, leaving behind a raw, humbled man who was finally seeing the true cost of his actions. His company was in turmoil. The board was demanding his resignation. His lawyers were calling constantly. He ignored most of it. He took one call from Frank. The DA is moving fast, Frank said. They're offering Isabella a deal if she testifies against Markham for a host of other financial crimes. Looks like they'll both be put away for a very long time. Good, James said, feeling a distant, hollow sense of victory. And Frank? Start the process of selling the penthouse, and my shares in Braden Capital, all of them. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Boss, are you sure? I'm sure, James said, looking at Elsie, who was watching him from the doorway. I'm starting over. A week later, on a crisp autumn morning, Elsie went into labor. It was 2 weeks early, but the local doctor said it was normal for a high-stress pregnancy. James drove her to the small community hospital, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. This was the true test, not the confessions or the apologies, but this. The labor was long and difficult. James was by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement. He was no longer the powerful CEO, but a terrified, hopeful man, completely subservient to the awesome power of what was happening in that room. He saw the strength in Elsie he had been blind to for so long, a deep, resilient power that dwarfed his own. At 3:17 a.m., their daughter was born. She was small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled the room with life. The nurse laid the baby on Elsie's chest. Elsie looked down at her daughter, her face streaked with tears and sweat, and a look of pure, unadulterated love transformed her features. She looked up at James, her eyes searching his. "What should we name her?" she whispered. James looked at his daughter, his heart overflowing. "Grace," he said, his voice breaking. Let's call her Grace. Elsie nodded, a small, weary smile touching her lips. It was the first real smile she had given him in months. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. It was Grace. They never went back to the penthouse. James sold his company, extracting a fortune that he put into a trust for his daughter and a charitable foundation in his mother-in-law's name. They bought a sprawling old farmhouse not far from the lake, a place with real wood floors that creaked and big windows that let in the morning light. The leather journal now sits on a bookshelf in their new living room, not as a secret testament to pain, but as an open story of survival. It's a reminder that the truth is often quiet, and that true strength isn't about never falling, but about having the courage to find your way back to the light. James and Elsie are not a fairy tale, but something more real. Two people rebuilding a life on a foundation of brutal honesty and hard-earned grace, one day at a time. This story is a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit. If you were moved by Elsie's journey to reclaim her voice and her dignity, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of strength, justice, and second chances. The church doors swung open just as the choir fell silent, and every head turned toward the wind. Snow blew in off Lake Michigan like a warning, and in the doorway stood Sheila Bennett, the woman William Ramirez had divorced last spring, wearing a simple black coat that didn't hide the unmistakable curve of late pregnancy. William's hand tightened around the program for his mother's funeral. The paper tore between his fingers. Beside him, Vanessa Pierce, his impeccably poised fiancée, leaned in and whispered, "She's here to make a scene." Sheila didn't speak. She walked down the aisle, gaze steady, stopping at the front pew where a velvet-cased envelope should have been. It wasn't there. Somewhere behind William's composed profile, a clock began to tick. The sanctuary smelled of lilies and winter wool. William stood when the pastor gestured to him. Words about Eleanor Ramirez, visionary, philanthropist, stern mother, rose from his throat and braided into the vaulted ceiling. He spoke of scrubbed Sunday shoes and sharp lessons about money. It's a tool, not a master. He didn't speak of the last argument he'd had with Eleanor, when she'd said, "You confuse control with care." When he stepped down, the pastor invited those with personal memories to share. A man from the foundation spoke. So did a neighbor with a tray of casseroles waiting in her car. Then, as if willed by the hush, Sheila rose. Vanessa's hand squeezed William's wrist. "Don't engage," she murmured. Sheila approached the lectern in flats that looked practical and tired. Her voice, when it came, was unvarnished. "Mrs. Ramirez sent me an email in August. She said family is the contract you can't tear up. She asked me to visit. I came once, quietly. We talked about forgiveness and responsibility." She paused, palm splayed over her stomach. "She asked me to keep a promise. She said I would know when." Murmurs swirled. William's jaw worked. He remembered Eleanor in August, thinner and newly tender, asking him who he'd become. He had said defensively, "A man who keeps things running." She had sighed, like a generator humming in a storm. Useful, loud, cold. Sheila's eyes moved to the front pew, the space where Eleanor's attorney had said a velvet case would sit with an envelope inside, to be read after the service. It was gone. She looked back at the room. "I'm not here to make trouble," she said. "I'm here to keep a promise." Afterward, people pressed Sheila with condolence and curiosity. Vanessa offered her an air kiss of compassion, so brittle it could cut. "You must be exhausted," Vanessa said, voice pitched for eavesdroppers. Late months can be so unpredictable. Sheila's reply was quiet. They're predictable enough if you've done this before. William blinked, the meaning striking him with a dull, old ache. He hadn't been there the last time. He'd been at a board retreat. Outside, the snow fell heavier. Black cars idled. Across the parking lot, Marlowe Kim, Eleanor's longtime lawyer, stood beneath a cedar, talking into her phone with her coat flung half-closed. William approached with the old deference he'd shown Marlowe since his father's time. "Where is the envelope?" he asked. Marlowe's eyes were dark with apology. "It was supposed to be under the spray at the front pew. It isn't. I had it last evening. I put it there myself after I closed the casket room. I'm looking into the cameras now." "Cameras?" Vanessa repeated lightly. "In a church? How tacky." Marlowe didn't smile. "We've experienced attempted document interference before." A gust sent snow spinning. William glanced back toward the doors, where Sheila stood, rubbing her side, breathing through a quiet contraction. Or a cramp, he told himself. He looked at Vanessa. Sleek hair, flawless lips, a bite of worry at the corner of her mouth. "We'll go to the house," he said. "We'll find it there." Vanessa slipped her arm through his. "Of course we will." Sheila watched them cross the lot. Her eyes flicked to Marlowe. "Mrs. Kim," she said, using the name Eleanor always had. "If you need a statement, I'll give one." "Eleanor asked me to." "To say what?" Marlowe asked. Sheila drew in a careful breath. "That the truth won't fit in anyone's pocket. The Ramirez home in Lake Forest had never warmed, even in summer. Too much glass, too much slate, as if Eleanor had commissioned a mausoleum by mistake." Now the foyer swam with coats and condolence. A catered spread sat untouched in the dining room. Deviled eggs, ham biscuits, miniature quiches no one would eat. Vanessa moved like a hostess in a magazine, guiding people to sleek chairs, explaining where the powder room was. She had chosen the black sheath dress that meant business and bereavement. At the edge of the living room, William watched the crowd assemble in concentric circles of loyalty and opportunism. Board members, foundation directors, an aunt from Madison with a purse that doubled as a filing cabinet. Marlowe arrived with a young associate and a thumb drive. She asked to use the media room. William led her down the hall past Eleanor's closed study. He fetched the key from the Chinese bowl in the kitchen, the one his mother used to pretend was for oranges. The study still held Eleanor's lemon hand lotion scent, her pens aligned like soldiers, her paperweight of fused glass. On the credenza, a rosary box sat open and empty. "Recognize this?" Marlowe asked Vanessa, who had followed them with a little gasp. "I don't spend time in dead women's desk drawers," Vanessa said, and then flinched, masking it as grief. "I only meant, I wouldn't know." "We'll review the footage from the church," Marlowe said. "In the meantime, keep everyone here. The envelope is a codicil. Eleanor signed it 2 weeks ago." William's head snapped up. 2 weeks? "Yes. Witnessed, notarized, filed. The envelope contained a letter to accompany it." Marlowe's look softened, briefly. "It changes the trustee structure and other things." Vanessa set her hand on William's arm. "Changes?" she asked, bright and careful. "Surely nothing dramatic." "Dramatic," Marlowe said evenly, "is in the eye of the beneficiary." By the bay window, Sheila had found a chair near the radiator. The heat felt good against her lower back. She'd avoided this house since the divorce. The corners were filled with ghosts. A yellow mixing bowl she and Eleanor had used to make lemon cake on a rainy Sunday. The way light turned the hallway rug the color of tea in late afternoon. The first winter after she married William, she had put garlands on that banister and felt something like belonging. That was before the prenup renegotiation he'd sprung on her as a standard update, before Vanessa's soft laugh in conference rooms, before knowable cracks widened into canyons. William approached, awkward in his own home. For years their marriage had been a series of parallel agendas, his calendar and her patience, until the day patience quit like a long-suffering employee. "I didn't know you would come," he said. "Eleanor asked me," Sheila replied. She was kinder in the end than any of us deserved. He wanted to ask the question that had chased him all morning. "Is it mine?" But the words were a wound that needed the right room, the right light. Instead, he said, "You mentioned a promise." Sheila nodded. "To bring what she wrote into the room. To keep it from getting lost." "Nothing gets lost here," Vanessa said, arriving with 2 glasses of sparkling water. She handed one to Sheila, smile luminous. "We run a tight ship. Ships sink all the time," Sheila said, voice gentle, and took a sip. Marlowe reappeared. "We found it," she said. "On the footage. The envelope at the church. It was placed, and then it was not." "Who?" William asked, stomach dropping into a familiar freefall that had nothing to do with elevators and everything to do with his own blind spots. Marlowe looked at Vanessa first, then William. The camera was angled. All we can see is a dark sleeve and a hand with a very distinctive signet ring. "I'll ask guests to remain while we contact the police." Vanessa's fingers moved reflexively toward her left hand, bare except for a slim platinum band William had given her as a pre-engagement. She didn't wear a signet ring, but his cousin Darren did. So did the foundation chair. William stared at the mantel, where a portrait of Eleanor at 40 looked like she could step down and slap common sense into the room. He heard her voice. Family is a contract you can't tear up. He had torn plenty. Agreements, boundaries, the soft fibers of trust. Now the paper fibers lay somewhere, ink drying in the air. "Keep people here," Marlowe said again. "We'll read what I have of the codicil to the room. If the envelope isn't returned by then, I'll file an emergency motion." Sheila set her empty glass on a coaster. The baby shifted high beneath her ribs. She looked for a rare second at William, not as the man who had failed her, but as a man who might still choose. He thought of late nights in the old apartment over the deli they had loved before money bought a better place. He thought of the first time she'd laughed in that kitchen, head tipped back, a jam jar of daisies on the table. If redemption existed, he suspected it started with something as small as that, remembering the sound of someone you once loved and letting it matter. The house's powder room, just off the foyer, was the kind of place people disappeared to at wakes, emerging with composed faces. It had wallpaper like a field of muted peonies and a gilt mirror that could flatter a fever. Vanessa washed her hands too long, watching the water ripple. She wasn't a thief, she told her reflection. She was a protector. Eleanor had been a useful inconvenience, beloved and immovable. A codicil now, so soon, threatened everything Vanessa had built, from careful suggestion and immaculate timing. In her handbag, structured black leather, small enough to look polite, large enough to carry a future, sat a velvet envelope. She'd plucked it from the pew when William stood to speak, fingers steady, heart wild with the intoxicating clarity that came after panic. You act or you lose. The envelope wasn't the only copy. She wasn't stupid. But it could buy time. She dried her hands and stepped into the hall. Darren Ramirez, half drunk and already bitter, lounged against the console. His signet ring flashed on his right hand, a family crest bought with old money and new swagger. "Nice service," he drawled. "You should have cried more, sweetheart. People love tears." "Grief expresses itself in many ways," she said. He smirked. "So does ambition." Vanessa stared him down. Darren had once cornered her in a coat closet at a fundraiser with bourbon breath and flattery. She had sidestepped, as she sidestepped everything that did not serve the plan. He was useful now only as a silhouette that might take heat. In the living room, Marlowe called for attention. Guests arranged themselves, the chorus of chair legs scraping wood a brittle overture. "Eleanor executed a codicil," Marlowe said, voice carrying with courtroom grace. "It makes 3 main changes. First, the Foundation's voting shares will be placed into a family trust with 2 trustees, myself and 1 family member, designated by a sealed letter, likely the one currently missing. Second, a portion of Eleanor's personal assets will be redirected to a community impact fund, specifically targeted to women-owned small businesses in Cook and Lake counties. Third," she paused as if stepping over a threshold. "Third, the codicil removes the restraining clause that prevented any bequests to future descendants of a dissolved marriage." William felt the room tilt. His aunt whispered, "What does that mean?" Someone else hissed, "It means she changed her mind about cut-offs." Sheila lifted her chin. Vanessa felt the perimeter of her world contract like a fist. "Eleanor believed in evolution," Marlowe continued. "She believed people could become more than their mistakes." Her gaze found William, and then Sheila, a subtle axis drawn between them. "The letter will specify the trustee designation and an accompanying statement of intent. Without it, we have to move forward with a presumption based on the statute and filings. I would prefer not to." Vanessa smiled in a way that photographed well. "I'm sure this can all be handled discreetly. Families don't need courts when they have love. Families need courts when they have money," Darren muttered. Marlowe's associate entered from the hall and whispered in her ear. Marlowe's mouth hardened. "The church confirmed. A hand with a signet ring removed the envelope. We'll be contacting the police." Gasps. A small dismayed, "Oh," from someone who collected Waterford crystal. Sheila stood. Her voice was calm. "Then perhaps the person with the envelope could simply set it on the mantel, and we could all go back to our grief." No one moved. Across the rugs and legalities, William looked at Sheila's hands, tinged with dish soap softness from years of doing for herself what money could have paid someone else to do. He remembered her first pregnancy, how she'd folded tiny shirts with reverence, how she'd held one up to her cheek and laughed. The miscarriage had stolen more than a heartbeat. It had stolen language. He'd tried to fix it with logistics. She'd needed a hand over her mouth, catching sobs in the dark. Not a calendar invite for try again. Vanessa's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. "Check your coat pocket." Stage left, camera in the sconce. She looked up sharply. The sconces that bracketed the mantel were antique brass. Cameras inside? "Eleanor, you paranoid witch," she thought, and then felt shame coat her tongue. But this was no time for sentiment. She moved toward the foyer, casual, weaving through condolences. At the coat closet, she slipped inside. She reached into the pocket of her own coat and felt velvet's mild resistance. She exhaled. Then a voice came from the doorway. "That's not yours," Sheila said. Vanessa turned, smile lacquered. "Everything in here belongs to the family." Sheila's gaze held hers, soft and fierce. "I thought we weren't doing closets anymore." Something like a laugh cracked through Vanessa's shell. She had underestimated Sheila, her steadiness, her refusal to be bait. "You don't understand what's at stake," Vanessa said, and for once her voice was honest. "I do," Sheila said. A contraction gathered low and bright. She breathed through it. A child's future, a family's name, a woman's dignity. They stood framed by coats and the smell of cedar. For a moment, Vanessa saw herself, as if through the house cameras, an actress caught mid-scene. She placed the envelope on the shelf. "You should know," she said, softer. Eleanor was going to name you. Sheila blinked. As Vanessa's eyes flicked away. Trustee, with Marlowe. She left the closet without touching the envelope again, heels clicking like punctuation. Sheila stared at the velvet and felt her heart kick against bone. She took one step and then another, carrying the envelope toward the living room, like a woman bringing bread to a hungry table. Marlowe opened the envelope at the mantel with the pomp of someone who understood both symbol and statute. The room leaned in. She read aloud, "To my family, if you are reading this, then I have done the thing I told myself I would never do. Change my mind publicly. I have come to believe that stubbornness is simply fear dressed in discipline. I have been afraid that my generosity would be abused, afraid that my choices would be mocked, afraid that my love would make me look weak. I do not want fear to make my last decisions. I name Sheila Bennett as co-trustee with Marlowe Kim. I name her not because she married my son, nor because she divorced him, but because she kept showing up for people who didn't always deserve it, including me. She is, in my estimation, the bravest kind of person, one who will tell the truth even when the truth is an unflattering color. As to money, a river that only feeds itself becomes a swamp. Send it outward. Watch what blooms. As to legacy, a family is not its press release. A family is its kitchen at 2 a.m. Be kind to the person rummaging for bread. As to the child, I hope will be born healthy. May you never learn that love must be earned. Eleanor, the room exhaled. Someone sniffled. Darren rolled his eyes and then, catching Marlowe's look, attempted contrition. Vanessa stood near the doorway like a portrait hung slightly crooked. William could not swallow for a full 5 seconds. The sentence about the child lodged inside him and pulsed. He looked at Sheila, but her eyes were on the paper. The letter made her feel as if the ground under her was finally the right material, rock instead of glass. Marlowe folded the letter carefully. There will be filings, she said, because there always were. But the letter is clear. The codicil stands. The police will likely want to know where the envelope went. Vanessa raised her hand like a schoolgirl who planned to ace the test by disarming the teacher. I moved it, she said. I panicked. I put it in the coat closet because I didn't want it to get mishandled. I should have brought it to you immediately. I'm sorry. Gasps. A handful of gratified looks. People who hated her now had a hook. Marlowe studied her. You'll put that in a statement? Yes, Vanessa said. Her voice did not shake. William felt something snap. A thread between the person he told himself he was and the person he had actually been with Vanessa. Complicit, distracted, willing to let charm do the work of conscience. Why? He asked her, genuinely. Vanessa's face rearranged itself into grief. Because I was afraid, she said. Afraid your mother's final act would undo everything we've built. We? William repeated. She held his gaze. For once, no performance. Yes, William. We. Sheila's hand went to the back of a chair. The contraction built and crested like a wave. Her breath stuttered. Marlowe noticed first. Are you all right? I'm fine, Sheila said, lied, and then the fine snapped in two. A sharp sound escaped before she could catch it. The room brightened at the edges. William moved without thinking. She needs a hospital, he said, already reaching for his coat. Now, I can drive her, Vanessa said automatically. Marlowe stepped in. No, William will. Sheila wanted to say she didn't need him. That was the old reflex. Self-sufficiency spiked with pride. But the car keys looked heavy in her pocket, and the cold outside promised to bite. She nodded, slow. Okay. The house shifted, as if a stage crew had changed sets. Guests murmured condolences, contact cards pressed into hands, casseroles retrieved. William guided Sheila out into the snow. The world smelled like iron and pine. For 2 blocks they said nothing, breath fogging. When the car heater finally caught, Sheila turned her face toward it and closed her eyes. "Is it mine?" he asked, because there was no right room, only this one. Her eyes opened. She had planned to say, "It doesn't matter." She had planned to say, "Labels are for jars, not infants." Instead, honesty came. Yes, the car hummed. Outside, Lake Michigan shoved itself against the shore. William's hand tightened on the wheel. "Okay," he said, and the word felt like a vow stripped to its studs. Northwestern Lake Forest Hospital was a quiet hive of urgent kindness. In the triage room, a nurse named Yvette checked Sheila's blood pressure and made a joke about winter babies arriving with scarves. Sheila smiled, grateful for the ordinary warmth of it, the way nurses had of placing humans in manageable categories without erasing their complexity. William stood at the window, looking at a parking lot the color of pewter. He had thought wealth could build a moat around pain. It could not. Pain walked on water. 34 weeks, Yvette said, noting Sheila's chart. Contractions irregular, hydrate and monitor. She looked at William. "You the dad?" Sheila answered for him. "Yes." It came out easier than she'd expected. "Then drink this too," Yvette said, handing William a paper cup of hospital coffee. "Dad's faint and they're heavier." She left with a wink that somehow unclenched the air. When they were alone, William said, "Thank you." "For what?" Sheila asked. "For not lying about me." "I got tired of lying about myself," she said. "It's contagious." He sat. The vinyl chair sighed. "I'm sorry," he said. And if there'd been a ledger on the wall, years of late nights and missed dinners and clipped tones would have started marking themselves paid. I thought making money for us was the same as making us. It wasn't. Sheila looked at her hands. I should have said what I needed with words instead of silence. He laughed, small and wounded. We're a great pair. You went quiet, I went louder, and neither of us heard anything. What now? She asked. Now I ask what you want, he said. He had been trained to make offers so appealing that no one remembered to negotiate. This felt different. This felt like showing an open palm and waiting. I want peace, she said. For me. For this baby. Legal peace. Emotional peace. The kind you can sleep in. He nodded. Okay, we'll build that. And I want you to call Vanessa, Sheila added. Tell her the truth. You owe her that, even if, especially if, this ends everything for you two. He winced. You're an unusually decent person. I'm someone who doesn't want to be lied about, she said. It's different. He called Vanessa. She answered on the second ring. Is she okay? She asked, startling him with genuine concern. Dehydration, he said. Preterm labor scare. The baby. It's mine. Silence creaked. Then, okay, Vanessa said. Okay, I'm sorry, he added, because there was nothing else. I know, she replied, and sounded tired. I'll send a car for myself. I'm leaving the house. Marlowe wants statements and the police want ring photos. The ring wasn't yours, he said. No, she agreed, but the decision was. Vanessa, he began. Don't, she said, not unkindly. Go be a father. When he hung up, Sheila watched the line of his mouth soften. She's stronger than I gave her credit for, Sheila said. She's many things, he replied. Strong is one of them. Yvette returned with water and a plan. They would keep Sheila overnight to monitor. Stress, she said, clipping a monitor to Sheila's belly, is an excellent liar. It tells your body there's a tiger in the pew when there is only grief. Sheila smiled. You should put that on a card. As monitors beeped their calm metronome, William told Sheila about Eleanor's letter. Sheila told William about the afternoon she'd spent with Eleanor in late September, how they'd made lemon cake and argued about forgiveness. She said I forgive too quick. I said she forgave too slow. She forgave, William said, in the end. Forgiveness isn't the end, Sheila replied, eyes on the monitor. It's a key to a gate. Then you've still got to walk. Marlowe worked like a woman whose sleep had been repossessed. She took statements, pulled camera footage, called in favors from a detective who owed her $2.50. In the footage from the church, the sconce camera showed Vanessa in the coat closet with the envelope. Her confession held. Another camera showed Darren loitering near the pew, hand hovering as if auditioning for a crime he did not quite commit. Marlowe called Darren to the study. He arrived drunk with indignation. "You can't treat me like a suspect," he said. "I can treat you like a relative," Marlowe answered, which is worse. She slid a set of photos across the desk. The signet ring, the sleeve, a posture that might belong to any man who had been taught the world was furniture. Darren blustered, then deflated. "It wasn't me. I thought about it. Everyone thought about it. Vanessa just did it." "She confessed," Marlowe said, "and now she'll live with that. The codicil stands, Darren. The trust will be difficult for men like you. You'll need receipts." He glared. "I have receipts." "Then you'll be fine," she said, and dismissed him with the gentle brutality of a woman who had done this too long to waste time. At the hospital, William spent the night in the vinyl chair and woke each time a nurse murmured. He stared at the ceiling and thought about what it would mean to make room. In his calendar, in his home, in his heart. Money took up space. So did regret. So did hope. The trick, he realized, was not adding but subtracting until the right things had room. In the morning, Sheila's contractions had settled into the background hum of a body working at the speed of its own wisdom. A resident cleared her to go home with rest and a list of foods that sounded like a kindergarten pantry. On the way to the elevator, they passed a newborn behind glass. The tiny mouth opened in a silent yawn. Sheila's breath hitched. In the lobby, reporters flickered like moths. News had leaked. Headlines would love them. Billionaire's pregnant ex at funeral. Missing will. William led Sheila through the side exit to the parking garage. He had never been good at side doors. This felt like learning to navigate the world without a brass key. At home, her home, not his. Sheila sank into the couch with a blanket and a list of instructions from Yvette. Eat, drink, sleep. Laugh at one sitcom rerun daily. William set a grocery sack on the counter. He'd bought every ginger ale in the store and came back with the diet kind by accident. "I'll make tea," he said, eager to be useful. She watched him in her small kitchen, where plants did better than people. "You can go," she said, not unkindly. "I know you have 100 fires." "I have one fire," he answered. "It's here." He looked around. Photos on the fridge, her sister's kids, a Polaroid of Sheila holding a lemon cake in a thrifted apron. "Can I fix the door latch?" he asked. "It catches." "Yes," she said, surprised by how easily yes arrived. As he bent with a screwdriver and a new humility, his phone vibrated with a message from Marlowe. "Emergency hearing today, 3 p.m., probate court. We need you and Sheila both. Vanessa, too." He glanced at Sheila. "Court," he said. "You up for it?" She set down her tea. "I guess we walk." The courtroom in downtown Chicago smelled like dust and damp wood. It had the sad echo of a school gym. Judge Armanda Velasquez presided with an arched eyebrow that could lift a boulder. On one side sat Marlowe with William and Sheila. On the other, a foundation attorney whose cufflinks looked like they'd never seen daylight. Vanessa sat behind them, alone, her posture precise and freshly human. Marlowe spoke first. She laid out the codicil, the letter, the attempted interference. She did not call Vanessa a thief. She called her a panicked party, which was both accurate and merciful. The foundation attorney argued that Eleanor's mind had been in decline and that late changes bore scrutiny. Marlowe produced video of Eleanor 2 days before signing, lecturing a board member into dignified silence. The judge watched for 2 minutes and blew out a breath. "If that's decline," she said, "I can only aspire." Then came the sealed letters effect, trustee designation, and the removal of the restraining clause. The attorney sighed and asked for a temporary injunction. Judge Velasquez denied it, with the satisfaction of someone ignoring a request to ruin a Tuesday. "And the interference?" the judge asked. "Is the state pursuing charges?" A detective rose. "At this time, we have a confession from Ms. Pierce. Given the property was returned and the circumstances, funeral, heightened emotion, the state will hold on charging pending formal complaint from the estate." Marlowe turned to Sheila, whose hand had moved to her stomach as if protecting a secret orchard. "Miss Bennet?" Sheila stood. Her voice did not tremble. "I don't want charges. I want order." "That's a first," the judge muttered, not unkindly. "What do you want, Miss Pierce?" she asked. Vanessa rose, chin high. "I want to apologize to the court, to the family, and to Ms. Bennet. I did a stupid thing because I was afraid. It won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," the judge said. "Now, to the matter of the trust. The court recognizes the codicil and the trustee appointments as valid. Ms. Kim, Ms. Bennet, congratulations and condolences. It's a messy job." Afterward, in the marble hall where voices ricocheted, Vanessa approached Sheila. Up close, without the audience, she looked younger. "I meant it," she said. "I know," Sheila answered. "Here's what I need from you. No leaks, no back-channel gossip. If anyone asks, you tell them what you told the judge." Vanessa lifted a hand as if to swear. "Okay. And thank you," Sheila added, surprising herself, "for putting the envelope back." Vanessa's laugh was a single bright sound. "I wish I could say it was conscience. It was a text from an anonymous guardian angel telling me the house had eyes." She glanced at Marlowe, who smiled the ghost of a smile. "Your mother-in-law was more thorough than the CIA." Sheila corrected gently. Then her eyes softened. "Maybe not for long." She surprised herself again. "Or maybe forever. Either way, we'll be kind." Vanessa nodded. "Be kind," she echoed, and the word sounded like a new language she could learn if she practiced. William joined them, tentative. "Sheila," he said, "do you want to come by the house later? Eleanor's lemon bowl is yours. You used it more than she did." Sheila glanced at Marlowe. "We have trustee duties," Marlowe said cheerfully, like reviewing a mountain of paperwork and saying no a lot. "But after that, yes." Vanessa stepped back. "I'll pick up my things. I'll send someone for the rest next week." William reached out, touched her elbow, a benediction without promise. "Take what you need," he said. "We'll settle fairly." "Imagine that," Vanessa said softly. "Fairness." She turned and walked into the late afternoon light that turned the granite columns the color of old honey. 2 weeks later, when sorrow had settled into the corners of the house like dust, Marlowe and Sheila met in Eleanor's study with stacks of files. They learned the language of the trust, disbursements, audits, oversight so granular it might as well be embroidery. They made small, firm decisions that would ripple outward into food trucks and daycare grants and women replacing broken furnaces. In a bottom drawer, Sheila found a brown accordion folder labeled in Eleanor's clean hand. April. Private. Inside lay 2 things. The first, a printed email from William to Eleanor, sent after the miscarriage years ago, in which he wrote, "I don't know how to fix this. If money could do it, I would write a check with the whole world on the payee line. Tell me how to be a son who doesn't make you ashamed, and a husband who doesn't make her grieve alone. Eleanor had replied, "You can't fix grief. You can carry groceries and listen. Start there." The second item, a bank statement showing monthly transfers from Eleanor to someone named Alicia Gomez, the woman who had cleaned the Ramirez house for 20 years, each note reading, "For the boys' braces, for the exam, for the deposit." There was a sticky note attached. "No one gets rich alone." Sheila sat with the paper, the way one sits with a truth that rearranges a room. When William joined them later, she showed him the folder. He read the email and lowered himself into a chair, as if sitting down was an apology. He traced his mother's handwriting with a finger. "She must have been tired of my speeches," he said. "She wanted me to carry groceries." "You're carrying a lot now," Sheila said. He met her gaze. "I want to carry with you." They talked, carefully, like people walking back into a house that had burned and been rebuilt. They did not pretend the fire hadn't happened. They admired the new beams. They named the scorch marks. That night, in her own little kitchen, Sheila thought about the story she had told herself for years. That she had left because she was small and he was big, because power imbalance was a beast you couldn't train, only escape. She realized a more precise truth. She had left because the power was misused. What she wanted now was not to flatten power, but to bend it toward gentleness and accountability. Her phone pinged, a photo from Vanessa, a potted rosemary plant on a windowsill. "For your kitchen. Think of it as an apology that is also a herb." Sheila laughed out loud, texted back a heart. Across town, Vanessa sat in a one-bedroom with good light. She had taken a job at a non-profit that taught financial literacy to women starting over. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman recalibrating. Her signet ring text to herself, "Don't be that again," glowed on a post-it above her desk. Spring arrived with sidewalk chalk and mud. The foundation board gathered in a high room overlooking the river. New trustees, Sheila and Marlowe, sat at the head, Eleanor's chair empty but present. William presented without flourish. He talked about measurements that mattered. Childhood asthma rates near the factories the foundation had once ignored. Graduation rates rising when daycare stipends kicked in. He did not talk about market cap. When an old guard member tried to bully Sheila into delaying the community fund while we recalibrate our optics, she placed her hand flat on the table and said, "We're not calibrating optics, we're changing outcomes." Marlowe hid a smile. William looked at Sheila the way you look at a lighthouse from a ship that once believed itself self-sufficient. 2 days later, Sheila went into labor. It was a Tuesday. The air smelled like rain on warm stone. In the delivery room, Yvette, God bless her, appeared like a recurring character in a series you hope never gets cancelled. "We're doing this," she said. "You ready?" "Ready," Sheila said, and meant it. William stood by her side, learning the complicated skill of being present without trying to manage. When panic rose, he breathed. When fear whispered, he said the simplest prayer he had, "Please." When the baby arrived, red and outraged and perfect, he cried in a way that surprised him because he didn't do that, and then realized he did now. They named the baby Lila Eleanor. Lila as in night and softness. Eleanor as in steel and lemon cake. Later, when the room went still, Sheila watched William hold their daughter. The way he looked at Lila made Sheila think of ocean floor photographs. New life clustered around shockingly hot vents. The harshest places grew strange gardens. On the third day, Marlowe visited with flowers and a file. "You don't have to read this now," she said. But when you're ready. It was the final accounting of the estate. Attached, a letter from Eleanor to Lila. I hope you grow into hands that lift more than they grasp. And I hope you forgive me for all the ways I didn't learn that sooner. Sheila cried because postpartum hormones and also because love. Vanessa came by the next week with the rosemary plant, an awkward smile and a gift, a stack of freezer meals labeled with cooking times. I learned these from the non-profit kitchen, she said, pride warming her voice. She held Lila for a minute, marveling at fingers that looked like exclamation points. We're okay, Sheila told her quietly. I know, Vanessa said. I planned to be too. Lila woke hungry at 2:03 a.m. The kitchen light glowed butter-soft. William warmed a bottle while Sheila leaned against the counter and watched the steam ghost the window. Outside, the city was a dark animal breathing. She sounds like a tiny opera singer, he said. She'll grow into a voice, Sheila murmured, bone-tired and happy. Remember Eleanor's line? He asked. About the kitchen at 2 a.m. being kind. Sheila smiled. We're here. He handed her the bottle and sat, close enough for his knee to brush hers. They didn't talk about remarriage. They didn't draft a new press release for the family. They fed a baby in the quiet house and listened to the radiator knock like an old friend. When Lila slept again, they opened the back door. The spring night smelled like wet dirt and something electric. On the porch, a potted rosemary from Vanessa sat sturdy. William reached for Sheila's hand. She let him have it. In the months that followed, order did not mean ease. There were nights Lila screamed, and days lawyers emailed, and mornings the trust required the kind of yes that cost. There were also afternoons when a woman from Waukegan brought a tray of tamales to the foundation office and cried because the microgrant meant her shop did not close, and evenings when William put his phone in a drawer and took Lila to the park, and Sundays when Sheila baked lemon cake in a bowl that once belonged to a difficult, beloved woman who had changed her mind just in time. At the first board retreat since Eleanor's death, they met not at a resort, but in a community center gym painted the color of toothpaste. The coffee was bad. The chairs were worse. They wrote on butcher paper and took bathroom breaks when mothers needed to pump. At lunch, William gave a speech that wasn't a speech. We're here because money can either feed itself or the neighborhood, he said. We know which one Eleanor chose at the end. After the meeting, Sheila found him by the vending machine, feeding it dollar bills that kept spitting back. Machines like you, she teased. They preferred me when I was all numbers, he said. People seem to like me better now. He pressed the selection again. The machine gave up a bag of pretzels, like a lesson in persistence. They ate them on the steps. He looked at her in that easy way that had returned, not like a man waiting for a verdict, but like a man building a kitchen at 2 a.m. I'm ready, he said softly. When you are. She thought about contracts you can't tear up. She thought about keys and gates and walking. She thought about the tiny body upstairs at daycare and the rosemary on the sill and the lemon cake in the oven that would be devoured by a room full of people who'd never imagined the hours that went into the crumbs. Soon, she said, and kissed his shoulder. Let's keep walking. They did. In the end, the story didn't make headlines because the good stories rarely do. A baby slept. A woman who had once been underestimated managed a trust like a lighthouse. A man who had confused power with care learned where to put his hands, and another woman took a job that paid less but made more sense, and, one day, taught a class where a mother of 3 realized she could open a savings account with $10 and a dozen brave decisions. Eleanor's letter sits framed above the kitchen desk, the one about kitchens at 2 a.m. There are nights when exhaustion wins and dinner is crackers and cheese. There are mornings when the trust meeting runs long and daycare calls anyway. There are choices to forgive and choices never to repeat. But the arc bends, not because apologies are magic, but because people decide to be kind at inconvenient hours. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to like, share, and subscribe. It helps more women find stories that feel like their own, messy, brave, and beautifully real.